Single-page applications, also known as SPAs, is a very old concept that is gaining popularity again. They can be programmed using a variety of different approaches, and some approaches are less effective and some give better results. Slim core technology development is better performing than heavy frameworks. Today I'll be explaining the tools and programming logic that I use to program SPAs. The last one I programmed was about a year ago for a client that required uninterruptible multimedia playing as the user goes from area to area and section to section and page to page, to where the multimedia just keeps playing uninterrupted. So that was the last one I built, and altogether I've built 8 of them so far. Now here what you're looking at on the screen is a working example that I programmed just for this tutorial to give you inspiration and insight into the programming logic as we view how it's working. I use core JavaScript and core PHP to program mine. Now first I'll show you in the application what happens when the page is reloaded. So you can see there's an animation that occurs in certain elements on the page, so you know for sure when the page is being reloaded because you'll see that animation every time. And as we go through it, you'll see that it never reloads as we navigate the different sections of the application or website. First I want to discuss with you the advantages, disadvantages, and also how to improve the user experience and performance of your SPA application. So first we'll discuss the advantages. The first advantage is improved speed and performance, and that's due to not as many requests having to be made every time a new page or area is loaded. For instance, here I made a graphic of the site that says content area is usually the only thing that changes when a user interacts with menus and links in your app. So when somebody clicks on one of the menu buttons or links within your pages, this dotted line represents the content area. That would be the only thing where content changes. The menus, the header, the footer, any side menus you have, you want to keep all of those in place and only adjust what's in the content area. But you can also adjust other things, but usually and traditionally the content area is the only thing that will change, and all of the menus and sidebars and footer and header and all of that will stay in place. And that's what improves performance a little bit. And also you don't have as many requests to the server because we can just use Ajax or fetch to replace the content within the content area. Now the next advantage is improved user experience, which things are speedier and more seamless. So it is an improved user experience. The next advantage you get is multimedia such as video or audio can play uninterrupted as they go through all the different thousands or millions or tens of pages that you have. You can also have video background that would be uninterrupted as the content gets swapped out. And the next advantage is easier application management. And that comes where you just have one file, because a single page application is just what it says, one single file that is all you have to manage for your design and also other programming aspects, such as the server-side programming, the client-side programming, and like I said, all of the graphics. You don't have to change multiple files or update multiple files when you want a change or an update. Now the disadvantages are you have a greatly decreased search engine optimization if these things are not programmed properly. If your SPA is not programmed properly, you can suffer a great decrease in your search engine optimization. But if you program it properly, you can get close to the search engine optimization that you have on a traditional website. Another disadvantage is harder initial development. So it's just slightly harder to initially develop an SPA versus a traditional website or application. The next disadvantage is if a user has disabled JavaScript, then they're not going to be fed any new content, and they might not even see your home page or your home screen, depending on how you set things up. And the next disadvantage is there are certain user agents that won't be able to process anything or see anything. But these are not just like normal modern browsers, but let's say there's a different type of user agent accessing the application. It's going to have a hard time getting to the content. Now last, we'll discuss how to improve your user experience and performance. A very important part of this is you have to program a loading animation into your AJAX or fetch requests. So when the user clicks on a menu button or link, you want to make sure that you don't just leave them wondering what's going on if the content coming in happens to take a second or two to get there with your AJAX or fetch request. So you want to have a loading animation right away when your AJAX or fetch requests fire off. And then when the content comes in, you remove the animation from the content area. And that could be any kind of animation you want, like a fan loader or a bar that moves across the screen somewhere under your header or the mast of your website or application. Now, another way you can improve performance is you can cache the dynamic data in either the app memory or user cookies. And that way, subsequent loading of certain content will be ready instantly, and it won't have to be fetched from the server again. Okay, now with all that discussed, we're going to take a look at the example I programmed, and I'll explain everything to you. Alright, so like I said, when the user first hits the application, you'll see that there's an animation that occurs just to set up all the elements. And I did that to show you that every time the file is reloaded, that animation will run. Now we'll start using the menu system. And you can see my URL, and I have this in a folder, so normally yours would just be your domain name and the extension, and not in a folder system. But it can be programmed into a subdirectory the way I have it here, but normally you wouldn't do that. Now I want you to keep your eye on the URL when I start clicking the different menu buttons. So when I click videos, it says video page rendered from database, and then videos is in the URL. Now I'll click manuals. Manuals is now in the URL and says manuals page rendered from database. And all of these pages are in my database. And you can use either AJAX or fetch requests to get it every time they click a button. So I'll click news, then search. Now another very important aspect of programming an SPA properly is to program using the history object or history API and the window pop state. And this is the way I get the URL to change in the address bar every time they click something. And if you don't do that, this won't change. The URL won't change. And you program against the pop state of the window object in order to do this, to allow them to go back. So watch when I click back in my browser using the browser button. You can use the back and forth browser button. See, it says news now. News page rendered. Now press back again. Manuals. Manuals page rendered from database. Back again. Videos. Video page rendered from database. So if you don't do that, you might confuse your users to where when they're clicking their forward and backwards buttons, they'll get confused because nothing will happen in your application if you don't program against the history object and the window pop state. So basically what you're doing is adding an entry into the history, and we use the pop state event in order to reload what needs to be reloaded into the page, into the content area, according to what's in the state object. Another very important aspect is you'll want to route everything to your single file. And in my case, you can see I have my subdirectory SPA, and my index.php is what displays the entire application. So it's my single file is my index.php, and I'm routing all requests to index.php with a path get URL variable. So my index.php is programmed to get the path from the URL variables and then process them. That way my application knows what data and what content to go fetch from the database. And you can add more to this kind of directive on your server. This is my htaccess file, and you can also set directives in other ways. You don't have to use an htaccess file. Depending on what kind of server you're on, you can set your directives in other ways, or if you have to, you can use an htaccess file like I'm using here, and this sort of code that you see will allow you to route everything to your index file. Oh yeah, when you're programming against the history object, you use the push state method in order to add an entry to the history and change the URL. Now I can prove that this is all working, because you could say, oh, Adam might just have all of these sentences in the page and not getting them from the database in this example. But watch if I go to the URL and reload it. I'm going to reload the URL and you'll see the whole animation occur again. And it says news up in the URL that it's actually an SPA. Now this is very important, because what if somebody takes this link and wants to show a friend on social media or link a colleague to a certain section of your application? They can just copy that link, post it where they need to post it, and then when the new user comes to your application, they will instantly be directed to that content instead of the home screen. And that's also a very important aspect. You want to make external links open the proper content. And the very last thing is you'll want to deal with random URLs. Like if somebody goes up in the URL and they type in nanny nanny boo boo, and that's not content that's within your application, then you'll want to give them a message in the content area saying this content is unavailable or this content does not exist. Now finally, before I leave you find people to it, here's a document from the Google developers website, and the title is Understand the JavaScript SEO Basics. And this will give you some insight into how to better program your SPA to be search engine crawlable to improve your SEO. And it talks about all kind of useful things here that you'll want to know and implement. Now like I said, mine is built using core JavaScript and core PHP. And since I've come back to YouTube, I was away for a long time, for many years, and now I've come back to YouTube and I've noticed that not many people enjoy core programming anymore. And so 95% of you, I think, are not going to be able to utilize the code that I'm using here. We would have different approaches to going about building this sort of thing. So I'm not going to share any of my code with you that powers this machine, because you guys would be using some sort of third-party framework in most cases. Because I've noticed that about 95% of you don't enjoy the core programming anymore. And so the framework that you use will assist you in getting something like this built. So it's pointless for me to share my code. Maybe if you guys have a change of heart or a change of work habits, in the future I'll start sharing my code again for large-scale applications like this. Because I have a lot going on here. I've got class files for database interactions. I've got a class file in PHP for processing the path up in the URL. I created a custom class file that processes the path for me, and my database knows easily what kind of content to fetch out of the database and display in the content area. But you guys would go about that in a different approach using the favorite third-party framework that you like best. And there's thousands of different third-party frameworks now. So you won't have any shortage of empowering tools to help you out in developing this sort of thing. And I believe if I was to give my code out, a lot of you would yell at me and call me funny names for not using one of the third-party frameworks. And this thing runs super fast because there's no extra bloat, There's nothing bloating this project, and it is so super slim because I'm using the core technologies, JavaScript and PHP. And you have to know what you're doing in JavaScript and PHP in order to develop something like this without the assistance of a large bloated framework. And if you guys start learning properly, then you'll have a speedier application. So I hope this programming logic helps you out in achieving your goals, and I wish you all the best. Talk to you soon. Bye bye. Oh, I almost forgot. I gave you guys a little bit of visual inspiration here in case you wanted to add other cool menus and areas of configuration for your users. So here I put a configure button and then an account button. When you press that, a little window opens up and slides the whole mast open. Then there's also an account button for account options. And then I put version 1.4 64-bit just to be extra nerdy and maybe impress people that don't know any better, because there's nothing really 64-bit about this SPA application. So it makes it just look more like a little software, and then you can click that and it'll show about the application.